He held the newborn in his arms for the first time, staring down at a tiny face he was searching for something in. A nose, a jawline, anything that looked like his own. Because here's the truth nobody in his world could escape. There was no way, none at all, to actually know. Quick question before we go further. Comment resemblance if you think ancient people relied on the baby simply looking like the father. Comment marriage if you think it came down to law and social rules instead. Stick around because the real answer is stranger and more human than either one alone. For his entire life, up until this exact moment, fatherhood had been simple, obvious even. You knew your father because everyone told you who he was and you believed them. But now, holding his own child for the first time, a quieter, more uncomfortable thought crept in. How did anyone actually know? Motherhood had never needed an explanation. Everyone in the group had watched her carry the child, watched her give birth. There was no question, no gap, no uncertainty to fill. But fatherhood was different. It happened somewhere private, somewhere unwitnessed, months before this baby ever took its first breath. No one else had been in the room. There was no moment anyone could point to and say, with total certainty, that is when this child began, and that is the man responsible. He looked around at the men in his group, then back down at the baby in his arms, and for the first time he understood something that had apparently troubled human societies for as long as humans had existed. So how did ancient humans actually handle this? With no blood tests, no DNA, nothing even close to biological proof? How did entire societies decide with total confidence exactly who a child's father was? And more unsettling, did they actually know? Or did they simply agree to stop asking? Put yourself in his position for a second. You're holding a child that half of your future depends on, your name, your resources, your legacy passed down through them, and there is no way, none whatsoever, to verify the one fact that matters most. Now imagine the woman standing beside him. She knows the truth. She has always known it. But in many ancient societies, her word alone often wasn't treated as proof, not because people assumed she was lying, but because an entire legal and social system had been built around a much simpler, more manageable idea instead. This wasn't a rare, occasional confusion. This uncertainty sat underneath nearly every family, every inheritance, every bloodline claim in the ancient world. And ancient societies, unable to solve it biologically, did something remarkably human instead. They decided to solve it socially. The first thing to understand is this. For almost all of human history, paternity wasn't provable. It was assumed. There's actually a phrase for this, one that Western legal tradition relied on for centuries. Pater semper incertus est, meaning roughly, the father is always uncertain. Motherhood, by contrast, was never in question. The identity of a mother was simply undeniable, witnessed directly by the community. Fatherhood carried no equivalent proof. It could only ever be inferred, trusted, or legally assigned. So how do you build a stable society on top of a fact you can't verify? You stop trying to prove it, and instead, you decide it. This is where ancient Rome offers one of the clearest examples in history. Roman law operated under a principle known as pater est quem nuptiae demonstrantur, meaning roughly, the father is whoever the marriage indicates. Under this law, a husband was legally considered the father of his wife's children, regardless of the biological reality. Not because Romans were naive about biology, but because they understood something else. A society cannot function on unanswerable questions. It needs answers it can act on, even if those answers are ultimately social constructions rather than biological facts. And here's the detail that might genuinely surprise you. This exact legal principle didn't disappear with the fall of Rome. It's still active law in many places today. Even now, a husband can be legally responsible for a child, including paying support, regardless of what a modern paternity test might reveal. An idea born out of ancient uncertainty is still shaping legal systems thousands of years later. But marriage law alone doesn't explain everything. Ancient communities also relied on something far older and far more instinctive: resemblance. Long before any of this became formal law, smaller ancient communities almost certainly leaned on the same tool many families still lean on today: looking at a child's face and searching for the father in it. A similar nose, the same eye shape, a particular way of laughing. In tight-knit groups where everyone knew everyone, resemblance wasn't scientific proof, but it functioned as something almost as powerful: social consensus. If enough people in a community looked at a child and agreed they saw the father's face looking back, that agreement itself often became the accepted truth, whether or not it was biologically accurate. And this is where the picture gets more complicated and considerably more human, because resemblance is unreliable, community consensus can be wrong, and throughout history, this exact uncertainty created enormous anxiety that shows up again and again in ancient beliefs about twins, superfecundation, and infidelity, ideas we've actually covered on this channel before. When ancient physicians mathematicians and philosophers puzzled over how two very different-looking twins could share one birth. Much of that confusion traced back to this same unresolved question. Without any way to biologically confirm a father, doubt could creep into any birth, at any time, in any family. This uncertainty is precisely why so many ancient legal and cultural systems worked so hard to protect the idea of fatherhood, even without protecting the biological fact of it. Marriage functioned in part as a kind of social technology built specifically to solve this problem in advance. By publicly and legally binding a woman to one man before a child was ever born, ancient societies created something they couldn't get from biology alone, a default answer agreed upon by the entire community before doubt ever had the chance to take root. This wasn't unique to Rome. Variations of this same basic approach, legal or communal assignment of fatherhood rather than biological proof, appear across many ancient legal traditions. The specific rules differed, the underlying problem and the underlying solution stayed remarkably consistent. When biology can't answer the question, society steps in and answers it instead. It would take thousands of years before humanity found anything resembling real biological proof, and even then, the earliest attempts were shockingly limited. By the start of the 20th century, scientists were finally trying to develop genuine physical methods for determining paternity. In the 1920s and 1930s, researchers turned to something newly discovered: human blood typing. Blood groups, it turned out, followed clear inherited patterns. If a child's blood type was biologically impossible given the mother's and the alleged father's, that man could be excluded as the father. But this method had a serious limitation, one worth sitting with for a moment. Blood typing could only exclude someone. It could rule certain men out, but it could only actually rule out roughly 30 to 40% of the male population as a possible father, meaning for the majority of cases, this modern scientific method still couldn't provide a real positive answer. It could tell you who wasn't the father, far more often than it could tell you who was. Later refinements, like HLA typing, pushed accuracy up to around 80% in some cases, closer, but still nowhere near certainty, and still unable to reliably distinguish between closely related men. Real, definitive proof didn't arrive until astonishingly recently. DNA fingerprinting was developed by British geneticist Alec Jeffreys in 1984, and it wasn't until 1988 that this technique first became available specifically for paternity testing. It wouldn't become widely accessible to ordinary people until the 1990s. Sit with that timeline for a moment. Humans have existed, in one form or another, for hundreds of thousands of years, and reliable, unambiguous proof of paternity has existed for less than 40 of them, which means almost every family, in almost every generation, across nearly the entire span of human history, operated on trust, resemblance, and legal assumption, never on certainty. And in a strange way, that changes how you might see this whole story. The uncertainty this ancient father felt, holding his newborn child, searching a tiny unfamiliar face for something he recognized, that wasn't a rare personal anxiety. It was possibly one of the most universal human experiences in our entire history. Nearly every father who ever lived, until shockingly recently, faced that exact same unanswerable question and simply chose, in one way or another, to move forward anyway. He looked down at the baby again. The eyes, maybe. Something around the eyes. He'd never know for certain. Almost no one in his world ever would. But he held the child close anyway, because somewhere along the way, his community, his laws, his culture, his own quiet decision in this exact moment had already answered the question for him, not with proof, with trust. So comment resemblance if you think that's how most ancient families really decided. Comment marriage if you think law did more of the work. And if this video changed your mind about which one mattered more, comment that too.